Relics. During an investigation, the crew is assisted by the seventh most interesting character from the original series.
Data picks up a signal from the USS Jenolan, a ship that disappeared 75 years ago.
On the way, they hit a gravitational field, but nothing on the charts says what would cause it, and Data finds a sphere 200 million kilometers in diameter.
And Data explains that their sensors didn't pick it up because its huge mass caused a large amount of gravimetric interference, which made me laugh out loud.
And Picard asks if it could be a Dyson sphere.
An enormous hollow sphere could be constructed around a star.
Which is actually a real concept, not something that they made up.
Even though the creator of the concept said it's nonsense. So even when we bring real science into the show, it's nonsense real science.
And they find that Jenolan crashed on the surface, so Riker, Geordi, and Worf beam over.
Geordi says the transporter is still online, and one science thing is connected to another science thing, but another science thing is disabled, and it's all causing a pattern to be stuck in the buffer.
Could someone survive inside a transporter buffer for 75 years?
They rematerialize the pattern using the original sound effect, and it turns out to be James Doohan wearing a sling. And he says that someone named Franklin was also being held in the transporter, but his pattern is now degraded.
When Scotty hears the away team is from the Enterprise, he assumes Kirk came out to find him, and he's also surprised to see a Klingon serving on a starship.
And causes him to ask how long he's been gone. When they beam aboard, Scotty checks out the technological advancements and talks to Geordi about how they ended up crashing into the Dyson sphere. Geordi talks about how clever it was to lock their patterns in the transporters, but Scotty reminds him that Franklin didn't survive. Geordi decides to completely gloss over the death of his friend and says he'll enjoy the future.
Franklin deserves better.
You know, I think you're going to enjoy the 24th century, Mr. Scott.
In sickbay, Beverly says Scotty is good to go, and Picard wants to hear about his experiences later. When Geordi says he's going in engineering, and Scotty can't go with him, Scotty puts on his sad puppy dog eyes.
Mark Zuckerberg shows him around his quarters, and he is overwhelmed by how large they are.
He wants to reminisce endlessly, which no one seems to have time for. Eventually, Scotty forces his way into engineering and demands that he be allowed to help.
Data examines the sphere, which seems to still be maintaining habitable conditions, but they haven't found any direct signs of life yet, so they send out a probe. In engineering, Scotty keeps meddling and telling Geordi that everything is about to explode.
Geordi keeps correcting him, getting visibly annoyed, and eventually emotions run high and Scotty leaves in a huff.
I've tried to be patient, I've tried to be polite, but I've got a job to do here. And quite frankly, you're in the way.
The attempts at fish-out-of-water humor reminded me of Star Trek IV, which was not a good thing.
Everybody remember where we parked?
Oh, jeez.
Almost as funny as when they drop those slugs in their ears in the second movie.
In 10 Forward, Scotty meets Data and is exposed to synthahol, which Data says gives the flavor of alcohol without the intoxicating effects, which seems like it would defeat the purpose.
He eventually finds some legit booze without knowing if it's safe for human consumption, but Scotty doesn't give a shit. Later, he wanders drunk through the hallways,
and he talks to the computer about his old ship and gets it to program it in the holodeck.
We get a cool rebuilding of the original series set,
complete with some static camera shots and the original theme, and Scotty is sad at what he has lost.
Picard comes to visit him, and they discuss the past.
Picard seems to have only cursory knowledge of the original Enterprise, which seemed very unlikely and out of character. And he asks Scotty for his opinion of the new ship, and Scotty says it may be more advanced, but he doesn't fit in anymore.
He's just in the way, and needs to start acting his age.
Picard tells Geordi to ask Scotty for help with learning more about the sphere.
Because his ship, the Jenolan, did an extensive study before they crashed.
Up on the bridge, Data picks up what seems to be a communications device on the sphere, so they try to hail it.
While Geordi and Scotty beam down to the crashed Jenolan.
A tractor beam locks onto the Enterprise and begins pulling it toward the sphere,
while overloading the ship's systems.
And I thought the effects for the hatch were pretty cool.
The tractor beam releases them once they're inside, but their inertia is keeping them on a course heading directly for the star in the middle.
On the Janolan, Geordi has trouble getting into the old systems, despite the ease with which they always manage to hack into alien technology.
But he and Scotty are now getting along. They're unable to reach the Enterprise, and Geordi wants to get the Janolan working again so they can trace its path.
Back on the Enterprise, they manage to use the maneuvering thrusters to change their course, and they manage to get into orbit around the star instead of crashing into it.
Picard wants answers, and it turns out the sphere was abandoned because the star is unstable. Maybe they should have done their research before building a sphere 200 million kilometers in diameter. And in 3 hours, the ship's shields will not be able to protect them from the solar flares.
Scotty makes some suggestions for getting the Janolan's engines working, and Geordi says that according to the books, it shouldn't work, but Scotty says he wrote the books. Literally.
They eventually get the Janolan working and deduce what happened to the Enterprise.
And Scotty says that on the Janolan they hailed the sphere right before they crashed. Geordi says that might be what caused the Enterprise to be pulled in.
Scotty has a plan to hail the antenna, but stay far enough away to avoid the tractor beam. And when the hatch starts to close, they'll jam the Janolan into the opening so the Enterprise can escape. And all of that sounded very much like an original series plan, in terms of how actiony it was.
Once the Janolan is in place, Geordi contacts the Enterprise with his plan.
It's able to move away from the star. Could they not do that before?
Yeah, I was a little confused about that.
And they turn the actiony plan even more actiony
by beaming Geordi and Scott aboard and blowing up the Janolan and treating the Enterprise like the Millennium Falcon.
We close with Geordi and Scotty each reminiscing about their experiences and the surprise of gifting a shuttle to Scotty.
He tells Geordi that he's a good engineer for the Enterprise and leaves, to go out into a world that he doesn't understand.
To crash land on some other planet. Relics. Overall,
this was an entirely fan service episode. Scotty was never a character that I found all that interesting or amusing, and the Star Trek IV humor really doesn't do it for me, so the fan service didn't service me whatsoever. I was much more intrigued by the Dyson sphere, but we didn't really find out much about that, and then the episode was over. At least Scotty had an arc, even if it was pretty predictable once the episode introduced the strain between him and Geordi. And even with all that, this was easily the best episode of the season so far, which is a huge disappointment in itself. I gave it a C-.
I gave this one a C. There were a lot of nods to the original series, more so than any of the other episodes with original series characters, and I agree, this was super fan servicey. I'm sure you can easily find a list of all the references somewhere on the internet, or people will just point them out here in the comments. This season has not been very strong, and I agree, this is the strongest one so far. I thought James Doohan did a good job of playing the character, but it was a little too much on how useless he was. The first place he should have gone after sickbay was straight to Troy, or really anybody, to just talk about what was happening to him. Just shoving him into a closet and then letting him wander around drunk on the ship was kind of dumb.
Yeah, but it's consistent with the way they've handled other people from other time periods.
They didn't even give him an escort or point of contact in case he had questions. Since he's such a born engineer, I thought it would have made sense for someone to say, hey, here's a computer which can tell you absolutely everything about technology changes, and he would have loved that. But when Picard suggested something like that, he outright said, I don't want to do that, which did not seem in character for him. It was a nice episode, but even with Scotty and all that reminiscing, it wasn't that fun of an episode, and I think they wanted it to be. And coupled with that Barclay episode, they now know how to survive basically indefinitely inside the transporter beam. Hope that comes up again, but it won't.
Well, let's hope this is the start of a shift toward better episodes for the season.
Or else this season is going to become a relic. That doesn't even make any sense. Like and subscribe.